A newly hired cleaning lady is mistaken for a hotel guest and receives the finest services from a millionaire. When he discovers the truth, he takes an action that shocks everyone. Emily Carter stood just outside the grand entrance of the Ocean, Pearl Hotel, gripping the straps of her modest handbag with trembling fingers. At 27 years old, she was no stranger to hard work, but nothing in her past had prepared her for the opulence that loomed before her. Marble floors gleamed like still water inside the revolving doors, and the scent of lavender and polished wood hung in the air like a whisper of wealth. Dressed in the crisp new uniform issued by housekeeping, a navy polo shirt tucked into beige slacks, Emily felt a strange mix of nerves and hope. This was her first day, her chance to start over. A month ago, she had been cleaning small offices in the outskirts of Orlando, surviving paycheck to paycheck. But life had a strange way of offering new beginnings, and when she'd seen the hotel's listing for cleaning staff, she had applied without expecting much. Now here she was, walking into one of the most luxurious hotels in Miami, where a single night's stay could cost more than her old monthly rent. She took a deep breath, stepped inside, and was immediately swallowed by the hotel's grandeur. The lobby stretched out like a palace hall, crowned with crystal chandeliers and flanked by towering columns. Bellhops moved with practiced grace, wheeling golden luggage carts with guest suitcases stacked like treasures. A pianist played soft jazz near the lounge area, where guests sipped champagne at noon and laughed in languages Emily could not recognize. She clutched her small staff badge and walked quickly past the reception, hoping to find the service elevator that would take her to the basement-level staff rooms. But the hotel's layout was a maze of elegance. Every hallway seemed to curve into another. Every door was styled to blend seamlessly into the marble or wood-paneled walls. Emily wandered further than she intended, trying to find a staff corridor, when a passing guest turned to smile at her. The woman, dressed in high heels and a designer coat, gave her an approving nod, as though she belonged. It was the first time in a long while Emily didn't feel invisible. She paused near a long row of elevators, glancing around for a staff-only sign, but before she could locate one, a voice called out behind her. "Excuse me, miss." Emily turned, startled, to see a young receptionist walking briskly toward her, tablet in hand and a courteous smile on his face. "You must be Ms. Carter," he said. "We've been expecting you. Welcome to the Ocean." "Pearl." Emily blinked, confused. She glanced at her badge, half opening her mouth to clarify, but the receptionist had already gestured toward the elevator. "Your suite is ready. May I escort you there?" "My suite?" she echoed, uncertain. "Yes, of course," he replied with confidence. "Penthouse level. We were told to ensure the utmost discretion." Emily hesitated. Something felt off, but before she could explain that she was not a guest, let alone someone important enough to be escorted to the top floor, a bellhop arrived with a smile and gestured for her to follow. Still stunned, Emily followed them into the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected her nervous expression as the elevator hummed upwards. Was this some sort of orientation prank, or had there been a mix-up? Her staff badge was barely visible, beneath the folds of her handbag strap. And before she could say another word, the elevator dinged and opened directly into a private corridor. "This way, Miss Carter," the receptionist said, leading her to a door at the end of the hall. He opened it with a keycard and stepped aside, revealing a suite more lavish than anything Emily had ever seen outside of magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of Miami's coast. A king-size bed sat atop a raised platform, flanked by handcrafted nightstands and silk-lined walls. Everything gleamed. Emily took a hesitant step inside. "Wait, I think there's a mistake," she began, finally finding her voice. But just then, another figure appeared in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a tailored grey suit that hinted at a swimmer's build beneath. His dark hair was styled effortlessly, and his green eyes held a quiet, almost analytical curiosity. He didn't smile like the others. He studied her. "Miss Carter," he said, extending a hand. "Alexander Hughes. I wanted to personally welcome you." Emily's heart skipped. She recognized the name immediately. Alexander Hughes, heir to the Hughes Hospitality Group, owner of this hotel and dozens more across the country. What was he doing here, greeting her like this? I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said quickly, her cheeks coloring. But Alexander didn't seem alarmed. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth curving upward. Misunderstandings, he said, are the most interesting beginnings. Emily didn't know how to respond. The receptionist and bellhop had already vanished, closing the suite door behind them. She was alone with the most powerful man in the building, standing in a room she wasn't supposed to be in, wearing a uniform that somehow no one had noticed. And yet, for a fleeting moment, she let herself breathe in the comfort of the plush room, the scent of orchids in the air, and the strange, quiet warmth in Alexander's gaze. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that nothing about this was right. But louder than that, another voice said, just for a moment, stay. She had no idea that this single, silent choice would alter the course of her life forever. Emily stood in the middle of the suite, her heart thudding in her chest. The air was too still, too silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath alongside her. The luxury of the room clashed violently with the simple life she had led for so long, and the presence of Alexander Hughes added a weight she could hardly bear. She opened her mouth again, trying to form words, to explain the confusion, but Alexander had already turned toward the minibar, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water with the casual grace of someone used to commanding entire boardrooms. I'm sorry, Emily finally managed, her voice barely more than a whisper, but I think Alexander raised a hand, not to silence her, but more like an invitation to pause. No need for formalities, Miss Carter, he said, taking a sip. I know this is all a bit overwhelming, that's why I prefer to greet certain guests personally, especially when I've been told they value privacy. She blinked. Certain guests? Privacy? What was going on? She looked again at her uniform, half hoping he would notice the obvious clue, but his eyes never left hers. Not once did they drop to her clothes. He wasn't seeing her uniform, he wasn't seeing a cleaner, he was seeing someone else entirely. But I'm not, she began, more firmly this time. Not what you expected, I know, he said, cutting her off gently but firmly. The Ocean Pearl is designed to surprise. Let us take care of you. You've had a long journey, I imagine. Emily stared at him, unable to speak. Every attempt to explain was blocked not by him, but by the sheer absurdity of the situation. It was as though reality itself had shifted, placing her in a role she had never auditioned for. Alexander smiled. It was a small, careful thing. Neither flirtatious nor distant, just a gesture of kindness or curiosity. Tell me, he said, leaning casually against the marble countertop, how have we done so far? First impressions matter. Do you feel welcomed? The question caught her off guard. She could have told the truth. She could have said, there's been a mistake, I'm staff. But something about the way he looked at her, like he genuinely cared, unlocked a hesitation she didn't expect. And more than that, there was the room, the view, the gentle hum of silence, the sense that for the first time in months, maybe years, someone was asking her what she thought, not what she could clean, carry, or endure. I do, she said finally. Feel welcomed, I mean. His eyes softened. Good, he said, that's what we aim for. He didn't press for more. Instead, he excused himself with a courteous nod, explaining that he had a meeting to attend but that a dinner reservation had been made in her name, if she wished to join. He left behind a small card with details and a room service menu that offered everything from imported wines to truffle risotto. As the door clicked shut behind him, Emily collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her thoughts spiraling. What just happened? The truth weighed on her chest. She hadn't meant to lie. She hadn't said anything false, but she hadn't corrected him either. And now she was in a suite she had no right to occupy, wearing a uniform no one seemed to notice, about to eat a meal she could never afford on her own salary. She needed to get out. She needed to find her supervisor, explain the mix-up, and beg not to be fired before her first shift even started. But another voice inside her whispered again, just one night of comfort, one night of being seen as something more, one night before the truth crashes down like a wave. She looked around the room again. There were fresh lilies in a vase, a basket of fruit, a welcome note handwritten and signed by the hotel director. The air conditioning was cool and scented, the kind that made your skin feel clean. She walked to the window, staring at the sun-drenched coast. The city stretched out like a promise beneath her. Later that evening, she found herself dressed in the robe provided in the suite, sipping chilled water and trying to decide whether she had completely lost her mind. Her phone buzzed. It was a reminder set by herself that morning. First day. Don't be late, be strong. It felt like a relic from another life. Against her better judgment, she went to the dinner. The restaurant on the 37th floor was a cathedral of glass and steel, offering sweeping views of Miami's skyline. Guests dined under soft lighting, their conversations blending into a low hum of luxury. Emily was shown to a reserved table by a hostess who greeted her by name with a smile. No one questioned her presence. No one looked twice at her. She was invisible again, but this time in the way that wealthy people were invisible, not unseen, but unquestioned. Alexander arrived minutes later. He had changed into a deep navy shirt, sleeves rolled slightly, the top button undone. He greeted her like an old friend. "I hope the suite is to your liking." "It's beautiful," she admitted. "More than I expected." "I'm glad," he said, signaling for wine. "I like to think our hospitality speaks for itself." Throughout dinner, he asked questions. Not invasive ones. He didn't demand to know what she did for a living, where she was from, or how she could afford the hotel. Instead, he asked about her thoughts, her favorite places, whether she preferred sunrises or sunsets, whether she believed people could really start over. She answered honestly, speaking in broad strokes, avoiding the edges of her truth, and to her surprise, the conversation flowed easily. He listened. He offered stories of his travels, his thoughts on solitude and leadership, his quiet frustrations with the hotel industry's obsession with image. It was not what she had expected. He wasn't the cold billionaire from the tabloids. He was thoughtful, intense, a little melancholic, and he seemed to like her. By dessert, the air between them had shifted. Not romantic, not yet, but charged. Like two people on the edge of something they didn't fully understand. When he walked her back to the suite, he didn't linger. Just a quiet goodnight and a promise that if she needed anything at all, the staff would handle it. Emily closed the door behind her and leaned against it, overwhelmed. She should have told him. She still could. But then she looked around again at the room, the life she had borrowed for a single night, and thought, what harm could one more day do? Just one more. The following morning arrived with the soft rustling of curtains drawn back by invisible hands and the filtered sunlight casting a golden glow over the penthouse suite. Emily opened her eyes slowly, confused for a brief moment by the unfamiliar softness of the bed and the absence of her usual surroundings. The cramped studio apartment, the chipped mug on the bedside table, the street noise seeping through thin windows. Here there was only silence, warm light, and the faint scent of orchids. She sat up, pressing her palms into the mattress as if trying to ground herself in reality. But the reality was absurd. She had slept in Egyptian cotton sheets, used a marble bathtub the size of her entire bathroom, and eaten dinner with one of the wealthiest men in the country. She was supposed to be pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies by now, scrubbing bathrooms on the 4th floor, not sipping orange juice on a balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay. The previous day's confusion had solidified into something else entirely. A misidentification, a misunderstanding, but most damning of all, a lie she had let grow by staying silent. She glanced at her phone. No missed calls, no messages. No one from the hotel had come knocking, demanding to know why one of their cleaning staff was lounging in a room meant for VIPs. No supervisor had reported her missing. It was as if the entire staff had collectively decided she belonged here, or more frightening, no one had noticed she was gone. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She jumped, heart hammering. Maybe this was it, the unraveling. She padded barefoot to the door and opened it, half prepared for confrontation. Instead, a young woman in a hotel uniform stood there, smiling politely. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. Mr. Hughes requested that your breakfast be brought up." Would you like it on the balcony or the dining table? Emily hesitated, glancing at the silver cart behind the woman, piled with covered plates and fresh flowers. The balcony is fine, she said, her voice measured. The woman nodded, wheeled the cart inside with practiced ease, and left just as quickly, never questioning a thing. Emily sat at the balcony table staring at a breakfast spread worth more than her entire weekly wage. Fresh berries, smoked salmon, golden croissants, eggs cooked to perfection. She picked at it without much appetite. Her mind spun in circles. She had to tell the truth. She had to explain the mix-up. But the moment kept slipping away. Later that morning, she wandered through the hotel under the pretense of exploring the property. The way a guest might, no one stopped her, no one questioned her. And when she passed by the front desk, the same receptionist who had welcomed her smiled and gave a respectful nod. "Enjoying your stay, Ms. Carter?" She nodded, numb, and walked on. It was surreal. The uniform she had worried would expose. Her was now hidden beneath a light summer dress she had borrowed from the penthouse closet. It was one of the few things in the suite still wrapped in dry cleaner's plastic, suggesting it was meant for guest use. She wore it like a costume, each step echoing the unease in her chest. By midday, Alexander called. "Would you join me for a walk?" he asked simply. "There's a part of the property I think you'd appreciate." They met in the rear garden, a hidden courtyard flanked by high stone walls and jasmine-covered trellises. It was quiet, apart from the sound of water trickling from a fountain and the soft chirp of birds. Emily tried to steady her breath, reminded again of how easy it was to fall into conversation with him. "I come here when the world gets too loud," he said, hands in his pockets, walking beside her. "Few people know it exists." "It's beautiful," she replied honestly. "I thought you might like it," he said, glancing sideways at her. "You're not like most people I meet." Her throat tightened. The sincerity in his voice made it worse. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. "I mean," he paused, "you don't try to impress. You don't expect anything. You just are. It's refreshing." Emily swallowed hard, unsure whether to laugh or cry. If only he knew the truth, that she wasn't mysterious or composed, but terrified and trapped in a lie that had taken on a life of its own. "I guess I've learned to keep things simple," she said instead. He nodded, seeming to accept that. Simplicity is underrated. They walked in silence for a while longer before he stopped near the fountain and turned to her. "Tell me, Emily, what is it you're running from?" The question hit her like a slap. She looked at him, startled. "What makes you think I'm running?" "Because I recognize it," he said gently. "I've done my fair share of running too." She couldn't meet his eyes. "Maybe I'm just trying to figure things out." "And have you?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Not yet." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'm here." She nodded, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. That evening she received another invitation, this time to attend a small wine tasting event being hosted in the rooftop lounge. It was optional, of course, but the staff had already reserved her a seat. Again, she told herself she would say no, that it was time to confess, to end this fantasy before it spiraled further. And again she found herself accepting. The lounge was filled with soft music and warm light. Guests chatted over glasses of rare vintages, laughing and exchanging business cards. Emily moved carefully through the crowd, trying to stay on the edges unnoticed. But once again she was greeted with smiles and politeness. Alexander was already there, speaking with a couple of investors, but the moment he saw her, his eyes lit up. He excused himself and crossed the room to her. "I'm glad you came," he said, offering her a glass. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a shock through her. "So am I," she lied. And that was the moment it truly became a lie. Up until then it had been silence, confusion, a mistake she hadn't corrected. But now, by accepting the glass, by walking among the guests, by letting him believe she belonged, she was actively playing a part. The guilt sat heavily in her stomach, but she couldn't walk away. Not yet. She was in too deep, and for reasons she couldn't explain. She didn't want it to end. Not tonight. The sun was dipping into the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the Miami skyline. High up in the Ocean Pearl Hotel's private lounge, the air shimmered with anticipation. A special dinner had been arranged exclusively for her. Emily stood in front of the full-length mirror in the suite, unsure of what she was looking at. The reflection showed a woman dressed in an elegant black evening dress, hair pinned in loose curls, a delicate chain resting at her collarbone. It wasn't a look she recognized. It wasn't her. Everything about the past few days had felt like a dream with frayed edges. One misstep, one careless word, and the illusion would collapse. She should have told him long ago. Alexander had been kind, open, surprisingly genuine for someone whose name carried enough weight to sway markets. And yet, she had let the misunderstanding fester. It had become a lie without her having to speak it aloud, and now there was no clean way out. But tonight felt different. The pressure had mounted quietly over the course of each interaction, each kind gesture she hadn't earned. She had reached the limit of pretending. Tonight, something had to give. She arrived at the private dining area just as the staff were lighting the last of the candles. The room was small, intimate, with wide windows offering a view of the coastline. A long table was set for two, draped in linen, accented with silver and crystal. It looked like a scene from a film, unreal in its perfection. Alexander stood near the window, hands in his pockets, watching the sunset. He turned as she entered, and for a brief moment said nothing. Just looked at her, as though unsure whether to speak or keep the moment sacred. "You look," he started, then stopped, chuckling lightly. "Let's just say I've been to 1,000 of these dinners, and yet tonight feels different." "Because you reserved the whole room?" she asked, managing a smile. "No," he said, stepping closer. "Because you're here." The compliment was disarming. She lowered her gaze, heart hammering in her chest. A server entered silently, pouring wine, setting down the first course. They sat, and conversation began the way it always did, with lightness, travel, art, music. Alexander asked questions that showed he listened, remembered, cared. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to know her, and that terrified her. He told her about his childhood, growing up under the shadow of a powerful family name, the pressure to perform, to lead, to become an icon in a business he hadn't chosen. He spoke of the loneliness of boardrooms and how wealth complicated everything it touched. Emily, in turn, shared pieces of her own history, but carefully, avoiding the parts that might reveal too much. She spoke about values, about the importance of quiet resilience, of humility. It wasn't a lie. It was her truth, just not the whole of it. Halfway through the main course, he leaned in slightly, his voice softer, more deliberate. "You speak like someone who's worked for every inch of what they have," he said. She looked down at her plate, unsure how to respond. "I admire that," he continued. "Too many people live in glass towers. But you feel real, like you've lived on the other side of the window." "I have," she said finally. "Most of my life has been on that side." He nodded as if he already knew. "But not anymore," he added. "At least not tonight." The statement hung between them like an unspoken contract. It was both a comfort and a warning. Not tonight. Which meant perhaps not always. The dessert arrived, an intricate creation of chocolate and berries, but Emily barely touched it. Her mind was drifting. The longer the evening went on, the heavier her conscience became. Every gesture of kindness from Alexander was another weight on her shoulders. She wasn't just pretending anymore. She was allowing someone to invest emotionally in a version of her that wasn't whole. And worse, she was beginning to enjoy it. As they finished the wine, Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You're quiet," he said. "What are you thinking?" She opened her mouth to speak, the words almost tumbling out. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm a cleaner. I shouldn't be here. This dress, this dinner, this view, none of it is mine." But then she looked into his eyes and saw something that caught her breath. Vulnerability, hope, maybe even something deeper, still forming. "I'm thinking this has been one of the most unexpected nights of my life," she said. "That makes two of us." There was a pause, and then he stood, offering his hand. "Come with me." She took it, allowing herself to be led out onto the balcony where the city pulsed below in 1,000 lights. The air was cool, the sounds of the ocean mixing with distant traffic. They stood there in silence for a while, not touching, not speaking, just watching the city. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I've met a lot of people who wanted something from me. Influence, money, access, but you're different. You haven't asked me for a thing, and still I feel like I owe you more than I've ever given anyone." Emily felt her chest tighten. "I haven't asked," she said slowly, "because I don't want anything." He turned to face her. "What do you want then?" And there it was. The question she couldn't answer because what she wanted didn't exist. She wanted this moment, this connection without the lie. She wanted the truth to have no consequences. She wanted a version of her life where she was allowed to be both, cleaner and companion. But reality didn't offer that kind of magic. "I don't know," she whispered. He nodded, accepting that. They lingered there, two people on the edge of something dangerous. Then, with no warning, Alexander leaned forward and kissed her cheek. Not a romantic kiss, something gentler, a mark of affection, of trust. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" she asked, stunned. "For being you." That night, back in the suite, Emily stood in front of the mirror again. She wiped off the makeup, unpinned her hair, folded the dress and set it back in its place. The woman from the reflection disappeared piece by piece, leaving behind someone she recognized more clearly now. Someone who was brave, yes, but also trapped. Tomorrow, she would tell him, she had to, because this wasn't a fairy tale, and even if it broke the illusion, even if it shattered everything they had built in these fleeting days, the truth was no longer something she could carry alone. The hum of luxury masked many truths within the Ocean Pearl Hotel. Beneath the polished marble, behind the perfectly aligned orchids and designer fragrances, life carried on with quiet undercurrents. The staff moved like ghosts, present but unseen, maintaining the illusion of effortless perfection for those above. In the midst of this carefully curated performance, the unexpected presence of Emily Carter in the hotel's elite penthouse suite had not gone unnoticed by everyone. Karen Foster, the hotel's general manager, had built her career on precision. She noticed everything. Misplaced champagne flutes, fingerprints on glass, minor delays in room service. Her standards were infamous, her instincts sharper than most. When she passed through the VIP wing 2 days ago and caught a fleeting glimpse of Emily standing in the corridor in what appeared to be a borrowed cocktail dress, something about the scene struck her as off. It wasn't just the unfamiliar face. It was the way the girl held herself, the flicker of uncertainty that crossed her expression when their eyes met. Karen didn't confront her then. She preferred patterns to confrontations. So she watched, waited. She reviewed the guest list that night and found no Emily Carter registered in any suite. A red flag. It could have been a name booked under an alias, a common request for high-profile guests, but no such alias had been recorded by the reception. Curious, she pulled up staff files. There it was. Emily Carter, newly hired cleaning staff, approved just 2 weeks earlier. Department, housekeeping. First official day, the day she was seen entering the penthouse. Karen leaned back in her office chair, fingers steepled under her chin, her gaze fixed on the monitor. Her first instinct was swift correction, an immediate termination. There were rules, uniforms, and boundaries existed for a reason. Staff were not permitted in guest suites without authorization, especially not alone, especially not overnight. But something about the case felt incomplete. There was no formal complaint, no sign of unauthorized use of hotel resources, no damage, no theft, no disturbance. And then there was Alexander. He had been behaving differently these past days, lighter, smiling more often. Not quite distracted, but certainly, engaged. He had made unusual requests, like the private dinner arrangement, the exclusive wine tasting, all reserved under the same guest profile, the same unregistered name. Karen had worked with him for years. She had seen him discard distractions, rise above scandals, ignore gossip. But this was new. Rather than act impulsively, she decided to gather more. She instructed the reception team to discreetly monitor access to the penthouse level. She assigned a trusted security officer to review hallway footage. She asked the kitchen to log meal deliveries to the suite. 3 days passed, and the pattern confirmed her suspicions. Emily Carter had not returned to the staff floor since the morning of her arrival. She had been living, dining, and appearing exclusively on the upper floors. Staff spoke to her with deference. Guests had begun to ask about the quiet woman at Alexander's side. On the 4th evening, Karen positioned herself near the rear garden, the same place Alexander liked to walk when meetings ran long. She had seen him exit that direction with Emily 2 nights earlier, their silhouettes framed by twilight. She didn't approach, she observed, and what she saw was not scandal, not misbehavior. It was 2 people speaking softly, honestly. It was emotional, if not romantic. And it made the situation more complicated. Karen wasn't cold-hearted. She had started at this hotel polishing silverware and folding napkins. She had clawed her way up through the ranks, enduring the silence expected of workers in the service of opulence. She understood the temptation of comfort, the ache for recognition. She had seen the hunger in the eyes of many who passed through the back corridors, but she had also seen what happened when boundaries were blurred. That night, she returned to her office and opened a file. Emily Carter's background check was clean, references sparse but reliable. A former supervisor had described her as hardworking and respectful. No history of rule-breaking, no signs of manipulation. Just a girl with a difficult past trying to rebuild her life. Which made Karen wonder, how had this girl ended up in a suite with one of the most powerful men in hospitality? The next morning, she instructed her assistant to call Emily in for a private conversation, but the assistant returned a short while later, looking uncertain. "She's not on the staff floor," the assistant said. "Security says she hasn't accessed it since the day she arrived." Karen nodded slowly, then made a decision. She would confront her in person, but not harshly. She needed to know what was truly happening and whether Alexander was aware. As she rode the elevator to the penthouse, she rehearsed what she might say. She would not accuse, she would ask. And if the girl had any sense, she would admit the truth and walk away quietly, with dignity preserved. But when she reached the suite, she didn't knock. The door was ajar. A bellhop was just exiting, wheeling out the breakfast cart. Karen stepped aside unnoticed and glanced inside. Emily was standing near the window, barefoot, coffee cup in hand, staring out at the sea. She looked peaceful, not triumphant, not calculating, just at ease. Karen's resolve wavered. She didn't step in. Instead, she returned to her office and made a note in her private log. Pending. Observation continues. She told herself it was for the good of the hotel, that no harm had been done, that perhaps the truth would present itself soon enough and no damage would come from waiting. But what she didn't admit, not even to herself, was that she had seen something in that young woman's eyes. Something she hadn't seen in her own reflection for years. Hope. And it wasn't something she was ready to destroy without knowing the whole story. The evening was vibrant with promise. A grand charity gala, hosted in the Ocean Pearl's gilded ballroom, drew in Miami's elite, their gowns shimmering under chandeliers, their laughter echoing off the marble floors. It was a spectacle of opulence, each detail crafted to perfection, from the cascading white orchids at every table to the orchestra playing a suite of classical melodies that hummed just beneath the surface of the event. The staff moved seamlessly. The guests basked in the glow of luxury, and at the center of it all stood Emily, dressed in an emerald gown that caught the light with every movement. She had not planned to attend, but Alexander had asked, and somehow she had not found the strength to say no. He had appeared at her door hours earlier, not with expectations, but with an earnest invitation. He had wanted to share this world with her. Just for one night, he'd said, just one evening where the outside world didn't matter. Emily had stared at the dress laid out on the bed. It was her size, untouched, its tag labeled with her initials in silver. Not from the hotel. From Alexander. He hadn't said as much, but she knew. And when she walked into the ballroom beside him, she did not feel like a cleaner. She felt like someone who belonged. The illusion held until it didn't. Karen Foster had watched the evening unfold from a distance, her expression unreadable. She had greeted donors, whispered to staff, nodded politely when spoken to, but her eyes had returned again and again to the couple near the head table. Alexander Hughes, smiling in a way he rarely did, leaning in to listen as Emily spoke. The girl moved gracefully, not with the polish of someone born to wealth, but with the care of someone who understood the weight of a borrowed moment. She wasn't pretending, she was surviving. But the longer Karen watched, the more the contradiction gnawed at her. She had spent days hoping for a simple explanation, one that would preserve the integrity of the hotel and protect the man who had entrusted her with so much. But tonight, surrounded by donors and dignitaries, the stakes had changed. The illusion was no longer private, it was public. And if this continued, it would not end with whispered questions. It would explode into scandal. So she acted. It was not loud, it was not cruel, it was quiet, surgical. During a moment of transition between speeches as guests were mingling near the stage and glasses were being refilled, Karen stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply approached Alexander standing beside Emily and said with poise and clarity that could cut glass, "Mr. Hughes, may I have a word?" He turned, surprised. "Of course." Karen's eyes flicked to Emily, who had stiffened beside him. "In private, if you please." Alexander nodded, his gaze questioning. Emily watched them walk away, her hands tightening at her sides. A server offered her champagne, which she refused. The lights above felt hotter now, the air too thick. Karen led Alexander to a quiet alcove just off the main ballroom. She waited until she was sure no one could overhear. "I need to inform you of something that concerns both your reputation and the hotel," she began, her voice calm, professional. "The guest registered in the penthouse suite under the name Emily Carter is not a guest. She is a member of the cleaning staff hired 2 weeks ago. Her access card was never deactivated. There was a mistake at check-in, and it appears she never corrected it." Alexander blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Karen said, "that she has been posing as a guest for almost a week, with full access to hotel services, staff, and most importantly, your personal time." There was a long silence. "She never asked for any of it," Alexander said quietly. "But she never stopped it," Karen replied, "and that, sir, is the problem." Alexander turned away, processing. His mind replayed every interaction, her hesitations, the deflections, the way she had avoided questions about her background, not with deceit but with careful omissions. "She didn't lie," he said finally. "Not directly." "That may be," Karen said, "but she let you believe something that wasn't true, and now the entire room has seen you introduce her as someone she's not." He didn't answer. He walked back to the ballroom alone, his face unreadable. Emily was still standing near the table when he approached. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she knew. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply looked at her for a long time, and then, with a slow shake of his head, he turned and walked away. The room didn't notice at first. The music played on. Guests continued to chat, but whispers began to stir as Karen stepped forward next, her voice quiet but firm. "Emily Carter is not a registered guest," she said, addressing the nearest cluster of staff. "Please escort her off the premises." Emily didn't resist, she didn't speak. She walked out of the ballroom with her head held high, the dress whispering against the floor, the weight of silence pressing down on her shoulders. She passed the hallway she had first wandered into, the elevator that had taken her to a different world, the staff who now watched her with eyes full of curiosity and pity. By the time she reached the service corridor, her steps had slowed. She stopped near a side exit, where a box of linens waited to be sorted, and took one last breath of the hotel's perfumed air. No words could fix it. No explanation could change what had happened. She walked out into the night, the city swallowing her whole. The streets of Miami pulsed with neon and movement, but Emily walked unnoticed among them, her borrowed dress clutched tightly to her body with a shawl someone had handed her on her way out. The heels she had worn so confidently in the ballroom now clicked harshly against the pavement, each step echoing the collapse of a world she should never have entered. The night air, thick with the scent of salt and gasoline, wrapped around her like a reminder of everything she had lost, not just the job, but the fragile version of herself she had started to believe in. She reached her apartment, a small studio above a corner market with peeling paint and flickering hallway lights. The lock stuck, as always, and she had to jiggle it twice before the door finally gave. Inside, the silence was immediate. Her things were just as she had left them, modest, worn, neatly arranged. A single mug on the counter, a stack of second-hand books on the floor, the tiny TV that flickered between static and local news. She dropped the shawl and sank to the bed, her body aching, her mind blank. Only when she reached to untie the dress did the tears come, silent at first, then harder, until her chest shook with the weight of it. Shame, humiliation, loss. The things she had feared most had not just arrived, they had done so publicly, with precision. She had been escorted out of the Ocean Pearl like a criminal, her name now, known among those who whispered behind manicured hands and inside boardrooms. She had gone there looking for a job. She left with a stain that might never wash off. She cried herself into exhaustion and woke the next morning to a pounding headache and a text message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. Just a single sentence. Your final paycheck will be mailed. No signature, no farewell, just a sterile goodbye. Days passed. Emily did not leave the apartment. She ignored calls from her sister, deleted unopened, emails from job search sites. She watched the city from her window like a ghost, invisible and forgotten. The world outside continued spinning, but for her time stood still. But in another part of the city, the fallout had taken a different shape. Alexander Hughes stood alone in his penthouse suite, his hands shoved into his pockets as he stared at the cityscape through glass so clean it nearly vanished. His mind was a battlefield. Confusion, anger, disappointment, and something deeper, something more dangerous. Regret. Since the night of the gala, he had spoken to no one. Not his assistants, not his father's advisors, not the press who had begun sniffing around, sensing the smoke of a scandal. He had read the reports prepared by Karen, reviewed the footage she'd quietly submitted, studied every timeline and entry log. And still, the only question that haunted him was the simplest one. Why didn't she tell him? He thought of her voice, her presence, the way she had listened without judgment, spoken without pretense. She had never asked for a thing. She had sat beside him at dinners worth thousands of dollars, without once making a demand, without once boasting or pretending. She had played no games. She had only not corrected the assumption. Was that truly deception? The board had already expressed their concern, discreetly, of course, through private channels. The whispers had grown louder. Alexander distracted, involved with someone unsuitable, compromising the brand. There were murmurs about image control, about damage mitigation, about potential consequences if he failed to step back into the role. Expected of him, he ignored them all. Instead, he sent someone to find out where Emily had gone, not to track her, not to threaten, just to know. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. And when the report came back, small apartment, no new job, no contact with former colleagues, something inside him tightened. He waited another day. Then he made his move. Emily was cleaning her tiny kitchen when the knock came. She didn't answer right away. She assumed it was another delivery mistake or a neighbor in need of change for the laundry machine. But the knock came again, steady, patient. She opened the door slowly and froze. A man in a suit stood there. Not Alexander, older, polite, a briefcase in hand. "Miss Carter?" he asked. She nodded, uncertain. "My name is Alan Reese. I represent Mr. Alexander Hughes. May I speak with you?" She stepped aside without speaking, her chest suddenly tight. The man entered with care, as though the room itself might shatter. He sat when she offered, opened the briefcase, and handed her a document. "This is a formal letter of retraction," he said. "It states that the Ocean Pearl Hotel acknowledges a failure in protocol that led to a misidentification of roles and responsibilities. It includes an apology for any distress caused during the events of the charity gala." Emily stared at the paper. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Mr. Hughes insisted on the language himself," the man said. "He has also requested your reinstatement. Full benefits, no probation." Her heart skipped. "Why?" "He believes you were treated unfairly." "That's not true," she said. "I wasn't honest." "You didn't lie," the lawyer interrupted gently. "And he believes there's a difference." She looked away, tears threatening again. "There's more," he added. "Mr. Hughes would like to meet, on neutral ground. No pressure, no obligations, just a conversation." She shook her head. Slowly, "I don't know if I can face him. He hopes you'll try." The man left, and for a long time Emily sat in silence. The letter shook in her hands. The words replayed again and again. Reinstatement, apology, conversation. She hadn't expected redemption. She had braced for silence, for judgment, for erasure. But this was something else. Hope returned not as a blaze, but as a flicker. And for the first time since she left the Ocean Pearl, she considered that maybe the story wasn't over yet. The cafe was tucked into the corner of a quiet street, away from the coastal bustle and tourist paths. It was the kind of place where business meetings didn't happen, where no one wore designer suits or asked for sparkling water. It smelled like cinnamon and fresh paper, the tables scarred with stories from years of conversations. Emily chose it on purpose. It reminded her of the world she knew, the world that had shaped her long before silk gowns and penthouse views had ever come close. She sat at the far end, back straight, hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. She hadn't touched it. The letter from Alexander's lawyer sat folded in her bag, heavier than it should be, even in paper. She had read it too many times. She had considered throwing it away, ignoring it, pretending that none of it had happened. But something in the wording kept drawing her back. Formal yet human, legal yet gentle. It was not just a shield. It was a door. And now she waited, unsure if she was hoping he would arrive or praying that he wouldn't. When Alexander walked through the door, there was no entourage, no fanfare. Just a man in a grey coat, his hair slightly tousled by the wind, his eyes scanning until they found her. He approached without hesitation, without a performance. He looked tired, but steady. "Hi," he said simply, standing across from her. "Hi. May I?" She nodded, and he sat. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The cafe hummed with quiet life around them. A child giggled at a table nearby. The barista clinked cups. Life continued, ignoring the tight knot of emotion sitting between them. "You look well," he said finally, and there was no judgment in it. Emily smiled faintly. "I'm surviving." "I figured." She didn't ask how he found her. She knew. It wasn't hard for someone like him to reach across any city. What mattered more was why he came. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to meet," he said. "I wasn't sure either." He nodded, accepting that, then leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "I'm not here to lecture, or to ask why. I think I already know. I've been in boardrooms where people lie to get what they want. You didn't lie. You just didn't interrupt the fantasy. And I think maybe that's because it felt good to be seen, even if it wasn't real." Her throat tightened. "It felt real to me." "I know." His voice was softer now, and when she looked up, she saw something unexpected in his expression. Remorse not for himself, but for what had happened to her, for the cruelty of exposure, for the violence of truth when it was wielded without mercy. "I should have listened better," he said. "I should have seen you for who you were, not who I assumed you to be." She shook her head. "It wasn't your job to guess the truth." "No, but it was my choice to react the way I did, and I did it wrong." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of things that didn't need to be said, of mutual understanding, of bruises not yet healed. When Alexander spoke again, his words were slower, more deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot since that night about the hotel, about the business, about what we say we stand for and what we actually do. We talk about excellence, about luxury, but maybe we've lost track of what hospitality really means." Emily didn't respond. She wanted him to continue. "I want to change that," he said. "And I want your help." She blinked. "My help?" He nodded. "I'm launching a project, separate from the Ocean Pearl brand, a new branch, smaller, more personal. I want to create spaces where service isn't based on status, where every guest, every employee is treated with dignity. No tears, no velvet ropes, just human care." She stared at him, her mind trying to catch up. "I don't know anything about designing hotels," she said, "but you know what it feels like to be ignored, and what it means to be seen. That's more valuable than any business degree. I need someone who can look at a policy and say, this doesn't respect people. Someone who can walk through a lobby and notice what others miss." Her voice came out small. "You really mean that?" "I do." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. Not legal, not formal, just worn at the edges from being handled. He slid it across the table. "There's a blueprint. Ideas. Names. I've already spoken to a few architects and hospitality consultants, but none of them have the perspective you do. I want you to be part of it." Emily looked down at the folder, but didn't open it. "This is a lot." "I know. And the board. Your family. What will they say?" "I don't care. I've already stepped down from most of my executive duties. I'll fund the project myself." She looked at him, trying to read between the lines, searching for ego, for manipulation, for any trace of the games rich men played. But she saw none of that. Just a man who had been changed by what he'd experienced. And who was, in a strange way, asking for redemption too. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She finally opened the folder. The first page was a mission statement, typed, but with annotations in the margins, notes in his handwriting. One circled line stood out. "Respect is not a luxury." She closed it again and nodded slowly. Not a promise, not a yes, but not a no. Alexander smiled faintly. "No pressure. Take your time." He stood then, slipping his coat back on, but paused before leaving. "For what it's worth, I never cared what you did for a living. I cared how you made me feel. That part was always real." Then he walked out, leaving the scent of coffee and change in his wake. Emily sat alone with the folder for a long time, her coffee still cold, her mind spinning with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, her story was only beginning. The following weeks unfolded in measured steps, like a path being revealed brick by brick. Emily didn't say yes immediately. She carried the folder Alexander had given her everywhere, not out of commitment, but as a way of testing its weight, literal and emotional. She read through the notes on buses, in laundromats, between long walks through neighborhoods she had once known only in passing. Each line felt both intimate and ambitious. There were margins scribbled with thoughts like rethink lobby structure, remove, class divide feel and staff input, critical, not optional. The project wasn't just about aesthetics or business. It was about reimagining how people should feel when they walked into a place that claimed to care. Still, she hesitated. Her entire life had been defined by certainty of roles. She had scrubbed floors, folded linens, wiped glass until her knuckles cracked. Her job was to disappear, to serve without being seen. Now someone was asking her to be the one making decisions, inviting her into meetings with designers and managers, expecting her to contribute ideas, to be visible in a room full of suits. That kind of change didn't happen overnight, and it didn't come without ghosts. But Alexander was patient. He didn't pressure her. He sent short messages every few days, not reminders, but reflections. A thought sparked by an old policy. A question about how front desk interactions could be warmer. A photo of a rug swatch with the caption, "Too cold." He wasn't asking her to work. He was asking her to think, to imagine. Eventually, she replied, first with questions, then with suggestions, then finally with a yes. The first meeting was in a rented co-working space downtown. It was all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, a far cry from the polish of Ocean Pearl. A single long table held blueprints, laptops, coffee cups, and name tags that no one wore. Alexander introduced her not as an assistant or consultant, but as a partner. "Emily brings the most important voice to this room," he said. "She knows what it feels like to be overlooked. That's what we're going to fix, The room fell quiet, then nodded in agreement. Emily didn't speak much that day. She listened, observed, took notes. But as the hours passed, something shifted. She wasn't just being observed, she was being asked. People leaned in when she raised points. They quoted her later. They took her seriously. At the end of the session, one of the architects approached, her with a shy smile. "You made us rethink the entire guest flow model. That was brilliant." Emily didn't know how to respond. No one had ever used the word brilliant in a conversation with her that didn't involve stain removal. She went home that night to her modest apartment, opened her window, and sat with the city noise wrapping around her like a new kind of silence, one not filled with shame, but possibility. The meetings became weekly, then bi-weekly. Each one deeper, more focused. Emily started to own her space in the room. She challenged ideas. She shared stories about back hallways that never saw light, about how the location of staff lockers could impact morale, about the way a smile from management could shift a whole shift's energy. Her voice became not only welcomed, but needed. But outside the planning rooms, not everything was smooth. News of her involvement began to trickle into the industry. Some dismissed it as a stunt, others called it bold. But within the Hughes empire, murmurs became discontent. Former colleagues, Tov Alexander questioned his judgment. Investors expressed concern. And from the shadows, voices rose to protect tradition. One afternoon, after a particularly passionate presentation Emily had given on restructuring internal training to prioritize empathy over speed, Alexander pulled her aside. "They're pushing back," he said. "Some of the old guard. They think you're overstepping." She laughed without humor. "I didn't even want this job." "I know," he said, "but now that you have it, I want you to keep it. You've earned that." She studied him. "You're putting a lot on." The line, "So are you." Their eyes locked, not with flirtation, but with shared risk. The following week, Alexander invited her to a dinner. Not formal, not business, but at a quiet restaurant he used to visit, before life became boardrooms and press releases. They sat at a small corner table, sharing dishes, trading stories of childhood disappointments, what they would do if no one was watching. For the first time in a long time, Emily laughed without weighing the sound against someone else's expectations. After dinner, as they walked toward the parking lot, he asked, "Do you regret it?" "Any of it?" She thought for a moment. "I regret not stopping the lies sooner, but I don't regret what came after. I never imagined I'd be able to sit in those rooms, have my ideas taken seriously. I didn't think someone like me got that chance." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Someone like you?" She nodded. "Invisible. Replaceable." "You're neither," he said firmly. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition of what they had both lost, what they were trying to build, and the cost of the choice they had made to do it together. That night, Emily opened her notebook, the same one she had used during her first training shift at Ocean Pearl. The pages were filled with notes about chemical safety and bed-making protocols. She flipped to a blank page and wrote at the top, "A hotel where no one is invisible." Then she began to write, and she didn't stop. The momentum of the project had begun to ripple far beyond their small conference room. Word had spread quickly within industry circles. Alexander Hughes, heir to one of the most prestigious hotel conglomerates in the country, had not only stepped away from his executive role at the Ocean Pearl, but had joined forces with a former cleaning staff member in building a new hospitality model. The story had the magnetic pull of contrast: wealth and humility, scandal and redemption, luxury and empathy. For some, it was inspirational. For others, it was a threat. Inside the walls of the original Hughes boardroom, voices were growing, louder. The high-level directors, most of whom had been groomed within the old structures of prestige and hierarchy, watched the rise of the new project with narrowed eyes. They didn't say Emily's name often, but when they did, it was with a tone edged in skepticism. "She's a wild card," one board member muttered during a quarterly meeting. "She has no formal training," another added. "She'll steer the brand toward instability, and most pointedly, Alexander has compromised the legacy. He's acting like a romantic, not an executive. None of this surprised Alexander. He had known the risks when he walked away from his father's boardroom. He had known that placing someone like Emily at the center of a revolution in service would anger those who had spent their lives profiting from inequality. But what he hadn't fully prepared for was how persistent the resistance would be and how personally they would take it. Emily began to feel the weight of that pressure during the planning of their first flagship location. The concept had been finalized, a mid-sized urban hotel, 20 floors, with entirely open-access spaces. No executive lounges, no segmented services. The idea was revolutionary, hospitality based on shared dignity. Everyone from a corporate traveler to a family on a tight budget would receive the same high-quality experience. No barriers, no veiled contempt hidden behind price tags. During a private meeting with architects, one of the senior advisors, an old Hughes family contact, voiced his discontent directly. "I don't see the strategic value in this egalitarian fantasy," he said, his eyes pinned on Emily. "You're betting everything on a concept that sounds more emotional than profitable." Emily answered calmly. "We're betting on people, real ones. The ones who keep coming back not because the hotel makes them feel rich, but because it makes them feel respected." The man didn't reply, but his silence was soaked in disdain. Later that day, Emily confronted Alexander. "They don't respect me. They don't even try to hide it." "I know," he said, sitting across from her in their temporary office. "It's not just condescension. They want me gone. They won't get it." "I'm not asking you to shield me," she replied. "But if keeping me on means losing their support, I'll lose it," he said without hesitation. His certainty shook her. "You can't burn everything down for this." "It's not burning," he replied. "It's pruning." She wanted to believe him, but doubt had begun to creep into the corners of her mind. Not about him, but about her own place in this movement. Imposter syndrome became a steady whisper in her thoughts. Who was she to dictate design changes, training philosophies, guest policies? Every decision she made echoed through budgets, timelines, and staff expectations. The pressure built, slowly but constantly. One evening she stayed, alone in the design studio after everyone had left. Floor plans and policy drafts were scattered across the table. She stared at them until the words blurred, until every idea she had once believed in seemed naive and fragile. She remembered the first room she had cleaned at Ocean Pearl. The time she spent perfecting the folds of the towels, the way she had hidden her shoes behind the cart to avoid scuffing the carpets. Back then, no one asked for her opinion, but at least the limits were clear. Now every voice in the boardroom came with power, with legacy. Hers came with risk. The door opened quietly. Alexander stepped in, carrying 2 coffees. "I figured you hadn't left." She didn't respond. He set 1 cup down beside her and took the seat opposite. "They met without me today," he said after a moment. "The advisory group. They're pushing a proposal to delay construction. Said we're moving too fast, that the market needs to stabilize first." Emily looked up. "You think they're trying to kill it slowly?" "Yes. Not directly. But enough obstruction can bleed a project to death." "And it's because of me?" "No," he said firmly. "It's because of what you represent." She shook her head. "Same difference." "No, it's not." He leaned forward. "They're afraid of change, real change, the kind that doesn't just look good in press releases, but actually shifts power. They don't care who you are, they care what you're proving, that people like them have had it wrong all along." She looked away, overwhelmed. "I can step back," she said, barely audible. "No. If it means the hotel gets built, no." She met his gaze. "You don't even flinch." "I flinch every day," he replied, "but not from you." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the city lights. "I didn't know who I was until I met you," he said. "I was just playing the role they gave me. And I think, maybe, you didn't know who you were either, until they gave you power and expected you to crumble." Emily stood slowly, joining him at the window. "They still expect me to. Then let's make them wrong." She nodded, The conflict was far from over, but the line had been drawn. They would move forward, not by avoiding the pressure, but by facing it. Together. Not as symbols, not as a story, but as two people building something real. And for the first time in her life, Emily wasn't just surviving, she was shaping the world. The boardroom was unusually quiet, its windows partially shaded, the late morning sun casting a sharp line of light across the long oak table. Every chair was filled. The Hughes Hospitality executive team had gathered for what was meant to be a quarterly review, but the tension in the air revealed a much deeper purpose. They were not there to discuss occupancy rates or expansion forecasts. They were there because Alexander Hughes had called them together for an unscheduled announcement, and none of them knew what it would be. Karen Foster sat near the end of the table, composed as always, her fingers lightly touching the tablet on which she had reviewed data points for the Ocean Pearl's recent performance. She had heard the murmurs like everyone else. Rumors that Alexander's side project had consumed more time, more resources, more loyalty than anyone had expected. She had also watched the slow but sure rise of Emily Carter, whose presence had shifted from curiosity to catalyst. And she knew that today would mark a turning point. Alexander entered without ceremony. No assistant, no folder, just himself. He greeted no one. He moved to the head of the table, buttoned his jacket, and stood still for a full minute before speaking. "I'm not going to take long," he said. "You've all seen the press. You've all read the statements, the speculation. I know many of you have been waiting for a clarification. For me to walk back the changes, reassert my focus on the traditional model, fall back in line." He let the silence hang. "That's not going to happen." Several board members shifted in their seats. One of the senior partners, a man who had once mentored Alexander's father, leaned forward. "Are you saying the rumors are true? That you're abandoning the Hughes legacy for this experiment?" "I'm saying the legacy needs to evolve," Alexander replied. "And if it won't, then I'll build something that will." He walked slowly to the whiteboard, where financials had been scrawled hours earlier during a market review, and wiped it clean with one motion. "This is what I'm building," he said. "A hotel group where everyone is treated with dignity. Not just the guests, the staff, the vendors, the maintenance team. Every single human being who walks through those doors. It's not charity, it's not idealism, it's a smarter, more sustainable model." Another executive, young, ambitious, loyal to the numbers, spoke next. "And what happens to us? To this structure? This company?" Alexander turned to face him. "This company will continue to run under the leadership of those who still believe in its model. I won't interfere, but I won't pretend to lead it anymore either." Gasps echoed around the table. Karen closed her tablet slowly. "You're resigning from Hughes Hospitality?" someone asked, incredulous. "No," Alexander said. "I'm stepping aside, temporarily. I'm retaining my shares, but I'm releasing operational control, effective immediately." A third voice, sharper, angry. "All for her? For this girl?" "No," Alexander replied, steady. "Not for her, because of her." The room stilled again. "Emily Carter didn't ask for this," he continued. "She didn't seek power or influence. She walked into this building to clean floors, and within days, she exposed every crack in the system we've spent decades protecting, not by criticizing, just by existing, by being kind, by being human. She reminded me, and maybe all of us, what hospitality was meant to be." He let that land before adding, "And yes, she's my partner in this new venture, but not because of sentiment, because she's the best person I've ever worked with when it comes to understanding what people actually need." A fourth board member, a woman whose portfolio included several of the company's most profitable properties, crossed her arms. "And if this venture fails? If the press turns on you? If the investors pull out? Then I'll rebuild from scratch," Alexander said, "but I won't go back to pretending." The silence was heavy now, not out of respect, out of disruption. What he had done was draw a line that could not be erased, and everyone in the room knew that history would mark this moment. Later that afternoon, Emily stood beside him on the top floor of the future site of their hotel. It was still steel and glass and noise. Workers moved across scaffolding. Blueprints flapped in the wind, but the view was clear. The ocean beyond, the city before them. He told her what he'd done. "You stepped down?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I stepped into something else," he corrected. "Something better." She didn't know whether to feel inspired or terrified. "You just walked away from your entire empire." "No," he said. "I walked toward something that might matter more." She turned toward the open space behind them, the skeletal beginning of the lobby. In her mind, she saw the future. A desk where no one was ignored, a lounge without velvet ropes, a hallway where staff and guests shared the same smiles. "What if we fail?" she whispered. "Then we fail for the right reasons," he said, "trying to build a world that's fair." And for once, the fear didn't drown her. It became fuel, because this was no longer about what she had done. It was about what they were doing now, together. The hotel's soft opening arrived not with fireworks or red carpets, but with the quiet hum of intention. There was no press wall, no list of celebrity attendees, no velvet ropes separating the powerful from the rest. Instead, the lobby buzzed with the natural rhythm of people arriving. Families holding tired children, solo travelers dragging their luggage, young couples with hopeful eyes and tight budgets. No one asked for upgrades. No one had to. The name of the new venture was simple: Common Ground. From the outside, it looked like any modern boutique hotel: clean lines, thoughtful landscaping, soft lighting framing the entrance. But inside, everything felt different. At check-in, no one stood behind a desk. Instead, hosts greeted guests at eye level, with tablets in hand and smiles that weren't forced. The air didn't carry the heavy scent of money. It smelled of warmth, citrus, and clean linen. Music played softly, not a curated playlist for branding, but a selection made by the staff each morning. Emily stood near the entrance that morning, not as a supervisor or a guest, but as part of the team. She wore no name tag, no title. She didn't need one. The staff knew who she was, not because of position, but because of presence. She was the one who had walked every inch of the building during construction. She was the one who had listened when the night janitor mentioned that the lighting in the back hallway felt too harsh, or when the front desk trainee suggested adding stools so guests with mobility issues could sit while checking in. She was also the one who had cried quietly in one of the guest rooms weeks before opening, overwhelmed by the thought that this place, this idea, had actually been built, with real walls, real keys, real people. Alexander found her there that morning, standing just behind the first group of arriving guests, her fingers twitching slightly, her breath shallow. "Nervous?" he asked. She nodded. "So am I," he said. They didn't need to say more. By midday, the lobby had settled into a rhythm. Guests wandered the communal areas, surprised by what they didn't see. No separation between economy and premium services, no hidden lounges behind unmarked doors, no condescending language about upgrades or status levels. Instead, guests sipped the same coffee, sat on the same couches, ate from the same menu. Conversations flowed more easily when no one felt inferior. The rooms themselves were uniform in size and design, neutral, calming, smartly arranged. What varied was not the material luxury, but the experience. Guests were offered a chance to personalize their stay, not by price, but by need. One woman asked for softer lighting because of a recent eye surgery. A young man requested help booking a job interview across town. Each request was treated with the same priority. Behind the scenes, the staff operated with a model that flipped the hierarchy on its head. Every employee, from housekeeping to culinary, had a seat in weekly operations meetings. Feedback was not filtered through middle managers. It was voiced directly. Raises were based not only on performance metrics, but on peer evaluations, empathy, and innovation. No one was called low-level. No one was ignored. One afternoon during the opening week, a woman staying in room 317 approached Emily in the elevator. "You work here?" she asked. "Yes," Emily said. The woman hesitated, then smiled. "I've stayed in a lot of hotels, big ones, expensive ones, but something here feels different. I don't know how to explain it. I just feel respected." Emily felt her throat tighten. "That's the idea. "I don't feel like I'm being tolerated," the woman added. "I feel like I matter." After she exited, Emily remained in the elevator, the floor buttons glowing in silence. That was the moment she knew it was working, not because of profits or press, but because of something quiet and internal. A shift in how people felt about themselves in a space designed to welcome them. Later that week, they held their first all-staff dinner in the rooftop garden. Not a gala, not a formal banquet, just long tables under strings of lights, mismatched chairs, and dishes brought from home. People laughed, they told stories. Alexander made a toast, brief and unpolished. "We built something good," he said. "Not perfect, but good, and we did it together." When he sat down, he leaned close to Emily. "This isn't the end," he said. "I know," she replied. "The hard part comes now, keeping it alive, growing it. I'm ready." And she was. The media did come eventually. Articles began to circulate about the new hotel where everyone was treated equally. Some called it revolutionary, others called it naive. But the rooms stayed booked. Guests left reviews that read like love letters. Staff turnover dropped to near zero. Competitors watched closely, confused and intrigued. Emily was invited to speak on a panel 6 weeks after opening. It was her first time on a stage. She wore simple clothes, spoke plainly. The room was full of industry veterans, hotel executives, consultants. "Someone once treated me like I was important," she said. And it changed everything. That's all we're trying to do, make people feel like they matter every day, whether they're staying for one night or working for 10 years. The applause came slowly at first. Then it didn't stop. That night, she stood again at the window of her new office. It wasn't large or fancy. It overlooked the alley where deliveries were made, where staff took smoke breaks and laughed between shifts. She liked that view best. This was the beginning of something that might not make every headline, might not win every award. But it was real. It was good. And it was hers. Finally, she belonged, not to a place or a person, but to a purpose. The first winter after the opening of Common Ground brought with it a different kind of pressure. Not the weight of uncertainty, but the steady demand of consistency. The novelty had worn off. The media attention had ebbed. The rooms were still, filled, the reviews still glowing, but now the hotel faced the quiet, relentless test of time. Could it remain what it promised to be? Could it resist the gravitational pull of convention, of compromise, of easier paths? Emily met that challenge each morning with the same ritual. She arrived early, before the sun pushed through the tall windows, walked every hallway, spoke to every staff member she passed, not because she had to, because it reminded her what mattered. At every corner she found traces of the philosophy they had built, guests helping other guests with luggage, staff sitting with travelers during meals, children laughing in a lobby where no one told them to quiet down. What began as a project had become a culture. Other properties took notice. Some dismissed Common Ground as a one-off success, fueled by media appeal and novelty. Others reached out, quietly at first, then with growing curiosity. They wanted to understand the mechanics. How had the hotel reduced incident reports by over 70% in its first quarter? How had staff satisfaction increased so rapidly, without throwing unsustainable salaries into the mix? The answer was never simple, but always the same: dignity. Every Friday, Emily hosted a meeting open to all staff. There were no chairs of power. Everyone sat in a circle. Concerns were raised. Ideas were debated. New systems were tested and adjusted. Mistakes were owned publicly, not punished privately. When a member of the maintenance team suggested changing the layout of the laundry pickup route to save time, it was implemented within the week. When a dishwasher proposed adjusting the break schedule to reduce overlap during peak meal prep, the kitchen was reorganized accordingly. It wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. Some guests still arrived with entitlement etched into their voices. Some staff still carried old wounds from previous employers. But here, people felt seen. That alone was transformational. One morning in early spring, Emily received an invitation she never expected. A national hospitality summit had named her their keynote speaker for the closing ceremony. The event would bring together leaders from across the country, from luxury brands to budget chains, all wanting to hear from the woman who had once scrubbed their floors. She hesitated before accepting, not because she didn't want to speak, but because she wasn't sure what to say. "I'm not a businesswoman," she told Alexander as they walked through the quiet lobby late one evening. He smiled. "You're the future of the business." She gave in and 2 months later stood before a crowd of nearly 500 in a vast modern auditorium. The lights were warm. The room was silent. Her hands trembled only slightly as she stepped to the podium. "I don't have a degree in management," she began. "I didn't climb a corporate ladder. I cleaned bathrooms. I vacuumed conference halls before events like this one. I was invisible for a long time. And then someone looked at me and decided I wasn't." She paused, let the room breathe. "We talk about excellence in this industry. We build beautiful buildings. We design perfect sheets. But excellence is not marble floors or 10-course meals. Excellence is how we make people feel. That includes the guests, but it also includes the staff, the janitors, the dishwashers, the night shift, the people who make those perfect mornings happen." She looked out across the audience. No one moved. "I was offered a moment of kindness," she continued. "Someone believed I had something more to give than what my uniform suggested. That moment changed my life. And now every decision I make is about giving that moment to someone else." When she finished, the applause rose slowly, then erupted. She didn't stay for the reception. She returned to the hotel that night, slipping into the staff lounge unnoticed. One of the housekeepers was showing a new hire how to fold fitted sheets efficiently. They laughed, arms tangled in linen, the kind of scene no designer could plan. She watched for a moment, then joined them. That summer, Common Ground expanded to its second location, in a mid-sized city with a strong working-class community. The launch was quieter this time. There were no cameras, no interviews. Just a ribbon made from recycled fabric, cut by a former cafeteria worker who had spent 30 years in the service industry. Her name was stitched on the wall in the employee commons, Linda James, for doing the work when no one was watching. By the end of that year, the industry had changed. Not everywhere, but in ways that mattered. Major chains began adjusting their staff policies. Some eliminated tiers of guest service that had bred inequality. Others restructured training to emphasize emotional intelligence over speed. It wasn't revolution, it was evolution. And Emily's name began to appear in textbooks, articles, TED Talks. But none of that changed how she spent her days. She still walked the halls every morning. She still sat in every Friday circle. She still listened before she spoke. And when a young trainee once asked her what the secret was, she only smiled and said, "Don't forget what it felt like when no one saw you. Then make sure no one else feels that way." In time, guests began to speak of Common Ground, not just as a hotel, but as a place where people remembered their own worth. Some said it healed them. Others said it reminded them how the world could be. And Emily, who had once been a name missing from a guest list, a girl in the wrong place at the wrong time, became a symbol not of scandal, but of what happens when someone dares to believe that respect should never depend on status. Her legacy was not in buildings or titles. It was in every quiet gesture that said, "You belong here, you matter, and we see you."